So I don't think I need to introduce you again, but for everyone watching, this is Ken Radner. This is his third time on the podcast. Excited to have him again. He told me to watch Tron and Tron Legacy this time. And I was a little reluctant because I didn't know it was again movies that I haven't watched, man, and I probably should have, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, something I'm actually for most of the time I'm going to take kind of a back seat to this because this is going to be such a vicarious experience for me
Okay.
because when like having, I mean, I saw these movies when they came out in the theater. I mean, especially
Mm,
the first one, and it was such an incredible experience. And I don't want to say too much because I want to know your impressions first because like I'm gonna get energy from that.
okay.
I want to know how you felt as I mean, and especially the first movie. I mean, the effects are a little dated, but
Mm,
I can go into a little bit of how that all worked out and how that was all done. But I'm interested in seeing as someone who's like now first time ever seeing this.
yeah.
What did you think?
All right. So when I watch movies, science fiction movies from the late 70s and the 80s, I always have to compare it to Star Wars because it was so ahead of its time. And I know that's not really fair, but I feel like Tron holds up in terms of special effects and CGI and everything they were able to accomplish to create the grid. I mean, the grid is unlike anything you'd seen before in a film, and it's so incredibly well done. And I did a little bit of research, and I know they use multiple styles of CGI and backlighting, and they use all these different techniques to bring this to life. It was so cool. I mean, even in my 30s, having seen it just for the first time, it works really, really well. But my favorite part is how well they develop Flynn. He's such a cool character. They very quickly establish him as like this edgy sort of badass genius, but he's also super down to earth and understands, you know, right between right and wrong. And he's so relatable and so accessible. And it's just an incredibly fun journey from beginning to end. And I have, I don't think I have any complaints about it.
That's okay. Good. No, that's a great thing to hear. I think that the the analogy at that time to Star Wars is very poignant because
Mhm.
basically I think Star Wars came out the year before. Um, or
Yeah.
it might or no,
So
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Star Wars came out in like
w-
77 and this came out in
yeah.
82.
What year was Empire?
Um, you got me there. I think
And
Empire came out after Tron.
okay, okay.
I could be
But
wrong though. So I
yeah,
had to
I
check
can
though.
never remember the actual year. But this is so good.
They did this is the reason why I feel that the comparison of the two of the original Star Wars and then Tron was that in both of these situations, they needed to develop entirely new ways of filming things
Mhm.
to create what they had.
Yeah.
Like you said, the backlighting, and it was something like, 7, 8 layers of everything, and they had to film it in black and white.
Hmm.
And they even did, before they even did that, the creator and the director of Tron did a kind of a test animation
Okay.
that they used as an opening theme to a lot of different animated things that they did throughout the years. There was this one series, it was two of them, it was called Animal Olympics,
Okay.
that was on HBO, and it was incredibly well animated. And they used as their opening sequence this kind of huge, muscular, backlit animated thing that was throwing discs. And
Hmm.
they literally, in their production notes, they called it Tron, but
Okay.
but it was before Tron existed. And this is where they got the beginning of that technology that they used to use in that entire movie. It
Okay.
was the movie in and of itself, when you look at it, and it does hold up, but when you look at the movie in and of itself, possibly not the greatest character development or writing, or kind of, sometimes things seemed a little bit wooden,
Mm.
but at the same time, probably one of the most innovative films made at that time.
Oh yeah.
And then the problem is that they were up against, when the same year that Tron came out, they were up against E.T., The Thing, Blade Runner, and Road Warrior.
Wow.
So, like, what chance did they really have? You know, and then the funny thing is, one of the guys that did a whole lot of the designing on Tron was also the guy that did the designing on Blade Runner.
Oh wow.
So Sid Mead was this guy's name. He was like
Very
this.
cool.
They called him like he was like a futurist artist, I guess
Okay.
is the term they use with him.
Makes
And
sense.
there was, yep, and there was another guy that worked on it. His, pen name was Mobius.
Okay.
All right, and Mobius was very famous for doing a lot of comics for the Heavy Metal magazine
Mm.
and the
Okay.
movie, and he did a whole bunch of stuff. Like once you see Mobius illustrations, it's him. They're
Okay.
so completely complicated, and I think he did some stuff for Dune. I
Okay.
think, even did some stuff for the unmade Jodorowsky version of Dune,
Okay.
which was, they tried to make Dune probably about 10 years before the David Lynch version.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, and it was insane. They have
Mm.
this documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, and
Okay.
it looked like it would have been, I guess the best I could have described it is, it would have been a fabulous disaster.
Okay.
I mean, they wanted to have, like, some of the actors they wanted to get Mick Jagger, oh, what is it? Who does the Persistence of Time? The painter?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, I'll remember his name in a minute.
Okay.
And like, just like ridiculous actors to be in this thing.
Mm.
And Salvador Dali.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Okay, to act in this
So
movie. So
so weird.
so it was already crazy. So, but this was one of the guys that helped design that, and he was involved in this. And you can really see it comes out in a lot of the designs and a lot of
Oh
the
yeah.
costumes, in a lot of the ways the characters acted, in a lot of the ways the atmospheres were. It was just, it was so groundbreaking for the time. And I mean, I
Mm.
was 11
Okay.
when this came out. And I just remember pestering my parents incessantly to get them to take me to see this thing.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it doesn't disappoint. And then,
No.
you have that first movie that was so groundbreaking, and they actually filmed the part with the laser.
Mm.
They filmed that in an actual laser laboratory.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they really took it, as far as they could really take it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just, I can't say enough about it, but I'm already talking too much because I really need to hear more of what you have to say, because I could go on for days.
So my wife and I love Disney. And I mean this is a movie that we've been meaning to watch because they just opened Tron uh Light Cycle Run, the new ride in Disney, and we haven't been on it yet. So we figured when we go back in July, we probably should, have seen this before we ride the ride. Um, so we were anticipating watching this at some point, and I watched it without her, and she's a little upset. But especially after I told her how good it was. But so Disney always does such a good job of world building, and this is such a unique example of that. I mean, again, we're in the early 80s where the ability to build worlds to this capacity it's not where it is today. So to be able to sit down and things look as crisp as they did, I mean, it certainly appeals to a younger audience in the sense that it's bright and it's vibrant and it's colorful and playful. But it's from someone who sits there and analyzes film, it was hard to find things. It was hard to find faults in it because it was so crisp. And like you said, they went to an actual laser laboratory and filmed certain scenes. Like they did everything they possibly could to make sure this looked as real as possible if this were to be real. And think I think it I think it works beautifully from beginning to end. And I think in order for this world to exist and for viewers to be able to suspend disbelief, even with as good as it looks, I think it starts with Flynn, and he's my favorite part of the movie because I use the word everyman every once in a while in reviews, and it's always this very down to earth and normal guy that works a 9 to 5 and deals with the same struggles that everybody else does, but he's almost larger than life because he's a genius and he gets sucked into this digital world and somehow you still relate to him in a lot of different ways. I mean, he's the guy that got screwed out of everything, and you relate to that. And he's this guy that gets to go on these epic adventures and you know uh, go toe to toe with the biggest and the baddest, whatever you want to call them. These insane things, um, and I just like fell in love with that character more and more as the movie went on. It's I'd never seen Jeff Bridges in that capacity. I I don't know if I've ever seen a movie with where Jeff Bridges had his hair. If I'm if I'm being honest, so that was interesting. That was very interesting to see him like that. First of all, to be that young, and he looks significantly different then. I mean now compared to what he did then, just in general. But he's so good. He's so good, and I mean, I can't say it enough. He was the best part of the movie, in my opinion. As great as everything else is, he was the best part of this movie. But I also like how smart the movie is. I mean, he is kind of he's kind of he keeps that idea alive throughout, this idea of intelligence. And but earlier in the film, one of the other scientists makes the comment, all the computers will start thinking and will stop, and that's 1982, and here we are in freaking 2023, and if that hasn't happened, it, Jesus, just sitting in a classroom with kids that are glued to their phone, it was right. It predicted the future essentially. And I like a movie that can make me think, but I also like a movie that is just so darn smart that it's probably too smart for its own good. And maybe that's the case here. It may have given people some ideas that maybe it shouldn't have.
I absolutely agree. It almost seems like it spawned a few ideas that maybe, and he was completely right with the older computer scientist who
Hmm.
started NCOM in his garage. And
Yeah,
then you get the corporate jerk who's like, well, I could put you back in that garage if you want.
yeah,
And just that whole idea of, yeah, if we make these things you know too much like our own minds, we won't really need to use our own minds anymore. And
hmm,
it does happen. And I think there's a certain amount of things when you're dealing with a certain movie and it has a certain amount of prescience to it, and it was actually able to maybe not even predict the future in a way, but just the idea of, this is the way we would see it logically going if this is
yeah,
what would happen.
hmm,
It was just a matter of this would be the reality of the situation if this kind of thing happened.
yeah,
And there are a lot of things that they, definitely did get right in that sense.
mm,
And it was, I just keep going back to at that time, the way that computers were. And I remember we were in grade school and they were just showing us on like Apple IICs how to like just do basic coding. And like I saw this movie and I'm like, I just did that, in school 2 weeks ago.
yeah,
Just so it was so visceral for me at that time. And I mean, Jeff Bridges was incredible. I think I mean, he definitely was the most animated out of. I don't mean animated drawn. I mean,
Right.
physically active and animated out
Yeah.
of anybody in that movie.
Oh, for sure.
And I think actually the funniest moment of the entire movie was when he was Clue in the beginning and he gives out that hilarious scream when
Oh,
he's
yeah.
about to get crushed in his tank. I
Yeah.
keep going back to that. And I'm like, why did you scream like that? Like that was silly, but it's funny. But he was great in that sense of the at that time we had that archetype of the tech genius who is also not trying to over corporatize everything.
Right.
That you wanted everything to be for the people, and you wanted this data and this new system should all be for everyone, and
Mm,
it shouldn't be regulated in a sense that it will restrict people from having access to it in one way or the other. And
right.
that was like a new thing because really, there, I mean, at that time, I don't think there even was any kind of internet type thing. It was maybe a couple of years later you were able to use
Mm,
dial up modems,
okay.
so it was just a brand new frontier and just the idea that this frontier should be available to everyone. And like that was, that character he was trying to make. And it's funny too, because Jeff Bridges did kind of carry that through into a
Right.
lot of his other characters, that he was that, that guy.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, he was really fantastic in that. Bruce Boxleitner was also good, although
Yeah.
you could see he was a little, he seemed a little more stiff in it. And
He
also,
did, but I think that works though, because I think he is like to a degree the stuffy nerd compared to
okay,
Flynn. So I
okay,
appreciated that.
yeah, that makes sense. And then I forget the name of the main female lead, but I mean, I know she was in Caddyshack.
Cindy Morgan.
Cindy Morgan. Okay. Yeah, no, I know that's why I always keep thinking every time I see her, and I was like, wait a minute, you were Lacey Underall. And it's just like you know,
So see, there's another one I have not seen. I have not seen Caddyshack yet.
oh my God, you're killing me.
I know.
Probably one of the funniest movies ever, but it might not age as well. You
Okay.
have to forego the idea that Chevy Chase is such a jerk now,
Yeah.
and back then he was actually kind of maybe a decent guy, but
Okay.
it's a good one. But that'll be for another time.
Okay.
We're gonna put that onto the shelf of the '80s movies that Ken forces Kyle to watch.
But I appreciate it.
But yeah, but it was. I really think that the first one it was really great. The director and writer supposedly got the idea to write the movie because of Pong.
Interesting.
All right, so just the idea of the two sliding things, bouncing something back and forth over each
Yeah.
other, and he got that image in his head, and that was, I believe, what a lot of the disc battles were about. That was
Makes
supposed to
sense.
be a game of Pong, and just I think was it Richard Warner who was the Sark, the main antagonist.
That sounds right.
Yeah, just so great in his role, obviously acting it in kind of a Shakespearean way,
Yeah.
which was always makes a great antagonist. I mean, anytime
Yeah.
a lot of '80s movies, you got a guy, quoting Shakespeare, you're like, okay, that's the bad guy.
Exactly.
And it was just really great. There was one scene, I don't know if you caught it, but they slipped Pac-Man in there when
I don't know if I did.
okay, so when Sark is looking at his control board
Okay.
and he's trying to figure out where Flynn is gone, it's like this big circular kind of graphic on it, and right in the corner there's Pac-Man.
Okay.
And they have the volume turned down really low, but you could hear the waka 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 going on.
Oh wow. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I thought it's so great, because they didn't deny in any way, shape, or form. No, no, this is totally a video game movie. I mean, we
Yeah.
know where we're drawing our sources from.
Sure.
The the design, I mean, the light cycle battles, that's probably one of the best scenes in film of that time.
Mm.
I mean, it took so much time to do that. They did it so cleanly, and it
Oh yeah.
just and I mean, just the idea. I mean, just the whole point. It's been compared a lot of times to the trench run in Star Wars,
Sure.
but just the idea. I mean, just the mechanic of showing that these things. You're in a computer, so you could do 90-degree turns instantly.
Yeah.
Which was actually there was there was a TV show that came out a couple of years later called Hollow Man. Not
Okay.
hollow as in hollow, HOLO, like holograph,
Oh, okay.
Hollow Man. And it was this guy that would turn into a hologram, and he had like a car, and he had his friend, like the everyman that would travel around with him, and his car would do 90-degree turns.
Okay.
And the thing they would do in the scene is he'd have like his regular guy riding in the car with him. He'd do the 90-degree turn, and the guy would just be like up against the side of the window.
Right.
And they totally stole it from Tron. It was just there was no way you could even see it anyway. Everything was backlit. The
Mm.
car was backlit. His suit was all. It was Tron, except he was supposed to be a hologram.
Okay.
So there were so many influences that first movie did,
Mm.
and then going beyond that. I mean, I had so many Tron video games. I mean, you know, my favorite was this one on Intellivision, which I'm not sure if you even know what Intellivision was.
I do not.
So basically, there was the Atari 2600,
Mm.
then there was ColecoVision, and then there was Intellivision. Right. So
Okay.
Intellivision was I don't remember which company manufactured it, but they basically had a bunch of different games. Their whole thing was their controller was a flat panel with this little disc on the bottom that you could push on any side or rotate. And then it had a keypad on it. It had like a telephone keypad on it.
Interesting.
And they would give you plastic inserts that you would put over the keypad, and each key could be different functions.
Oh, okay.
So for the Tron game, they had this game called Tron Deadly Discs. And
Mm.
now the deal was within television, any kind of action oriented character was basically their football player sprite icon.
Okay.
So it was basically like, arms and legs that would move, and then like a helmet with like a line in the middle.
Mm.
All right. And anytime they would do a game, so they would do it on football. And then you would have like a space combat thing, and it would be the same guy, but he'd have a jetpack on.
Okay.
And then when they did this Tron game, it was just the football guys, except they had like a little, dash they were holding in their hand that was supposed to be the disc.
Wow.
And the keypad would let you throw the disc in different orientations. So, like number 3, you'd throw it diagonally up this way,
Mm.
and so you would just do that, and then you could block, and you could for a game that was that early in video game generations. It was
Right.
actually pretty in depth and complicated, and it was just like it was really fun. I spent endless hours playing that game. So it just this movie just you know inspired so many different things,
Mm.
and just the idea that took them almost 30 years to get a sequel
Yeah.
was incredible. And so many other innovations. I mean, for the one thing I actually jotted down is the person who did the music for the first movie was this woman, Wendy Carlos. And she actually, through that movie and some other things she developed after it, she developed the Moog synthesizer,
Wow.
which is so there were so many things that were birthed out of this movie,
Mm.
and it actually, I think it was something like on a budget of like 10 or 15 million dollars, and it did like 54 million.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it did a decent job, but I think the thing is the producers were expecting Star Wars money out of this movie,
Sure.
you know, and they
I
didn't get that. And I, as a child, was very upset that the action figures were horrible.
Yeah.
Like I was looking for a lot more, but they
Well,
definitely, I mean, they started, you know, I guess a good segue. They started a legacy that
yeah.
was that was very interesting, and that there's still some questionable future about it too in the beginning.
So before I get into Tron Legacy, I am curious because on the previous episode we did we did Lost Boys and then the sequel to that, and we talked about how disappointing that sequel was. So growing up with Tron and then seeing the sequel almost 30 years later, how did that sit with you? How did you feel about it?
I really liked the movie. I definitely, it's as we have discussed before, and this we might have to visit later on, was definitely an amalgamation of Flynn and the dude.
Yeah.
So it was fun to see, and it's what I was expecting.
Okay.
I wasn't disappointed. It's just that when you have the original movie that was so groundbreaking in the way it was and everything it did,
Yeah.
and then this movie, there was nothing really negative about it. And as a matter of fact, the computer effects of the time were actually really well done. I mean,
Yeah.
they were like really, really tight, very, very detailed. They were pretty much authentic and loyal to the spirit of the original one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just that you can't do that twice. You can't do that original one again
Yeah.
because they were doing it with technology that already existed. They had already done the Matrix, so you're looking at it, and I'm like, all right, it's you're doing the Matrix look.
Yeah.
I think possibly one of the best things about the second movie was the soundtrack, was that they got Daft Punk into it,
Yeah.
and those guys are incredible. And they were, even though they did it a bit differently than the original, they still, same thing, very authentic. It
Mhm.
fit very, very well. That type of music for, harkening back to that kind of, 80s type of pop synth stuff.
Mhm.
It really, really worked for what they were doing.
Yes.
It seemed like to a certain degree, at certain points, they were making it more like a generic action adventure movie.
Sure.
So at that point, some of those points fell a little flat for me, but overall, I just, I mean, I really loved it. I just thought that just the funniest parts were just basically, you know, having Flynn, he's basically a Jedi at this point, you know.
Yeah. Yes, he is.
Yeah, yeah, and I thought it was great. The one thing that I do have to say is I'm not sure, but I think this was the first instance that they used de-aging technology on people.
That makes sense because that was one of my big complaints
Yeah, it
was
was
when,
clunky.
and I guess to a degree you could just kind of accept it because it's not Flynn, it's Clue. Um, so I mean, if you can just accept that it is an animated character all the way around, maybe you can get by that. But I struggled with it regardless.
No, I understand. And, see, the point that got me is I understand that point of it, that, when you're on the grid, yeah, it's Clue. But when they first show Flynn talking to Sam
Mm.
and they do the reveal of his face and like his mouth is all weird and everything looks
Yes.
plasticky. And that was supposed to be in the real world. So
Yeah.
that was one of the things when I was watching the movie and I saw that, I was like, cool. You got the younger Jeff Bridges, and there's plenty of material to, be able to do that.
Sure.
But it wasn't good. I think when I saw them do in Ant-Man,
Mm.
when they did the de-aging, that was almost perfect.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
looked
Yeah.
fantastic,
Yeah.
and
The
that's
Marvel
why.
films do very well.
Yeah, and that's why. But and that's the whole thing, is this was it was obvious that Disney was pioneering this technology.
Yeah,
And that's what I keep forgetting. Like when I keep watching this movie, I'm like, wait a minute, this was a Disney movie. This was the first time they tried it out.
yeah,
And it just kept getting better and better and better. And they're getting to a point now where it's almost, you can't, it's undistinguishable.
yeah. I agree. I mean, to see the jump from 2010 with Jeff Bridges to I guess it was 2019 in Endgame where they did it with Michael Douglas. Michael Douglas
Mm-hmm.
looks like Michael Douglas did 60 years ago. It's so
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but so I think they were pretty. I'm sure they were, but they were aware that this technology was choppy and what people were going to see was going to be less than ideal. And I do appreciate the fact that while he's talking to Sam on the bed in that opening scene, it's very dark. So it's possible that viewers could be, well, it's dark, and I understand like maybe I'm not seeing things as well as I possibly could because it's dark. So I think they kind of do that to save themselves to a degree, knowing full well that when they reveal Clue that people are going to be a little ticked off that he looks the way he does. But like you said, overall, it's pretty disappointing how he looks. But if that's the worst part about it, I mean, again, it's new technology that they're using. They're using new techniques, which is exactly what they did in '82 with the original. So it's kind of cool to be able to introduce new technology in this one in a world where it seems like we're almost as good as we can get when it comes to filmmaking. Like it seems hard to think what's better than what we have right now. It almost seems perfect. So to be able to introduce something new and we can see how they're developing, even just 13 years ago is pretty exciting. And I'm able to overlook it, I guess, even though I'm, a little ticked off. But um but so with Jeff Bridges in the first one, I thought what a perfect choice. I never questioned it. Great actor. Garrett Hedlund, when I saw him as Sam, thought, well, sometimes he's great and sometimes he's complete shit. And I wasn't sure. Like he's great in Four Brothers, but he's terrible as Hook and Pan. Like I hate Pan because it's not a good movie, but I think he ruins it. Like he just kind of throws it off the deep end. Um, but he was really really good in this, and after listening to him and seeing him, I don't know if there was a better choice to play Flynn's son. I mean, even the voices were so similar. I really really appreciated that. And then I see at the end the casting is Sarah Haley Finn, casts all the MCU movies, and thought, well, no kidding, it makes sense why she casted so well. Um, were you a little skeptical about that casting, or did you have somebody better in mind?
I thought he did a pretty good job. He does
Mhm.
definitely have the similar look.
Yeah,
So they definitely, handle that. He has a similar kind of attitude. I think that it wasn't so much of if there was an issue with him, it wasn't really the casting that was the issue. I think it
hmm
was more of the writing. They kind of
okay,
made him more just like this, generic, I'm a rebel, like
yes,
kind of guy. And it was they didn't do a whole lot of character building with him. They did some,
sure,
but that's I think one of the things that this movie comes short in is that everybody except for Cora actually everybody kind of leaves this movie almost the same way they came out in, except for a
yeah,
little bit of, resolution of the father son issue,
yeah,
and then, Kevin, I'm not sorry, Kevin Sam deciding to actually, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for the company now. And,
yeah, which
you
wasn't a
know,
surprise. I feel like everybody knew it was
exactly.
headed that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. No, go
Go ahead.
ahead.
No, I was gonna keep saying like I don't think that was a surprise. So I don't know So again, I think that that falls in line with what you were saying, not tons of character development, because we knew that was going to happen. It would have been surprising had he come out and gone, no, I'm cool the way I am. But to see him develop exactly as we anticipated kind of takes away from that, surprise at the end, if you want to call it that. Um, but so at first, Olivia Wilde felt so out of place to me. Like she did not belong in this movie, and is it Michael Sheen felt so out of place to me throughout the entire thing. I never got used to him. I get he's supposed to be incredibly quirky and just very very unique, but I never got used to that character or the actor in general. I just thought he had a very odd look for that. He seemed out of place all the way around. Cora eventually grew on me, and I felt like I mean, she was the female protagonist, like in the original, and I think she kind of came into it as the film developed. It was kind of like the cheesy, super powered woman in the beginning when she's not the beginning, but when she first is introduced, when she saves Sam, and I think it was maybe a little over the top in the beginning, and Olivia Wilde didn't really fit that role in my opinion to begin with. But as emotion develops and you see what an important role she plays in Kevin's life and then eventually Sam's life, she comes into it because I feel like that drama is more her speed rather than this action-packed journey.
I think the Michael Sheen thing you're saying with him, I, basically being Ziggy Stardust the entire time.
Yeah.
I mean, and he and so over the top, and
Mm,
chewing the scenery, and they always have that one character in there in the movie that's the character actor,
right.
and yeah, and he just always goes over the top. I thought, I mean, he had, I guess he had his point to play it the way he played it because of what his character was supposed to be,
Right.
but at the same time, it did kind of take a little bit away because you're like, I'm not, now it's not about the movie. Now it's just about me.
Right.
I think it was awesome though how Daft Punk is in his club and he's like
Yeah.
telling them, "Hey guys, play this tune," and so
Right.
that was kind of fun. And I think the introduction of Cora in it follows along with a lot of the issues in a lot of kind of these, science fictiony, even though it's not the 80s, but proto 80s type
Hmm.
action movies where you get introduced to this character and they're the ultimate badass. Like
Yes.
they can do everything. They shoot like a million gunshots at once and kill
Yeah.
everybody. And then 3 minutes later, they sprain their ankle.
Right.
So it had a little bit of that. It had the, over the top, we're going to introduce this one is, the new hero, but then she obviously becomes much more flawed. I think the introduction of that she's a new form of life is
Hmm.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that they left open ended in this that if another movie ever gets made, they should definitely address, which there have been murmurings about a new, movie coming along for like almost like 7, 8 years now.
Wow.
And like Jared Leto's supposed to be producing it or something like that.
Oh, I don't know if I would like that because J-
He's supposed to,
J-
apparently he wants to be the villain and he wants to produce it because but again, after Morbius, I'm very doubtful.
he doesn't play these kinds of roles very well, these science fictiony comic book roles well. They're just not for him. He should stick to things like American Psycho and what is it, The Little Things with Denzel Washington. He was fantastic in that. He plays the very creepy, dramatic character very well, but not as the Joker and not as Morbius. And I, I I'm gonna be sick to my stomach if I find out that he's the antagonist in the next Tron movie.
I mean, that's the only news that I've heard, but probably the reality is it's never going to happen.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because
Unfortunately.
I think they really set themselves up for a lot of success. I mean, to be able to create a movie almost 30 years later, a sequel almost 30 years later, and it be as good as it is. I grapple with the idea that Tron Legacy was potentially better than Tron. And you might hate me for that, um it but it for to be able to say that at all, even consider that, is a huge win. It's a huge win for them. So I don't know why you wouldn't continue that because that's Disney's MO. You just beat something into the ground until it can't make you any more money. So it seems like it's their thing, just like to make as many of these as possible. Um,
I am not going to disparage you in any way for saying that, Legacy might have been better.
okay.
Technically, of course it's a better movie. I mean,
Hmm.
better technology, better acting, better filming. It's the point that I wanted to make is that it wasn't as uh it wasn't as technically inventive as the previous one was, because
Sure.
I mean, again, created entirely different styles of filming and entirely different techniques of doing these things. And one of the first movies to make an extensive use of CGI, as compared to a movie that, well, we use CGI all the time now. And,
Right.
so it wasn't as groundbreaking, but at the same time, it was definitely better written, better
Yeah.
acted,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to deny that at all.
So when I wrote my review, I actually said that the intensity and the drama was much higher, much more relevant in the sequel and Legacy than it was in the original. Because I think they very quickly, when you're pulled into the grid, you see much more intense fights. You see people dying much more gruesomely than you do in the original, and that certainly appeals to some part of the human psyche. But I just think in general, the writing was better in that regard because you were able to understand how intense it was. It didn't You didn't just feel like you were in a video game anymore. And you very much felt like the stakes were higher. And I like that about it. Um, but then earlier you had obviously mentioned the idea of the original standing the test of time. And thinking about it now, knowing that a lot of the things that they spoke about in the original have come to fruition, it makes that one, even if it was accidental, just as dramatic and intense as the sequel. I mean, to literally see people not thinking for themselves anymore makes that quote and that idea within Tron so much more intense, so much more accessible, and so it's really hard to determine which one is more dramatic and more intense. But I felt like they did a better job of developing that throughout the course of the film in Legacy compared to the first one.
All right, well, a couple of things about Legacy, carrying over that idea of how they were kind of prescient in some of the things that they did when Kevin Flynn is talking to Sam Flynn, and he's like, so, tell me about the world, tell me what's going on around there. And he's like,
Mm.
internet, Wi-Fi. And he's like, what's Wi-Fi? And he's like, well, wireless connection. And he's like, between digital devices? I thought of that in 1985.
Yeah,
So it's like they were kind of trying to retcon that a little bit to show that,
sure.
yeah, maybe we thought about, other stuff, than that. But I always thought that was, like that was, I guess kind of cute, that he
Yeah.
did that, and they were willing to put that in there. And one thing that I think is really interesting about, talking about how the action sequences were a lot more aggressive. I mean, first of
Mm.
all, nobody was doing, kung fu flips, in 80s movies,
Yeah.
except for maybe Big Trouble in Little China, which we're going to talk
Okay.
about that another time.
Okay.
But the guy that Kaczynski, so the guy that directed Legacy,
Hmm.
also did Top Gun Maverick.
Okay.
So you're talking about a guy that has a good eye for action.
Yes.
Now, I never watched the original Top Gun.
Okay.
I wasn't interested. I just, I didn't see any real purpose for myself in it. And then so my wife has me watch Maverick, and I watch it, and I'm like, this movie is incredible.
Hmm.
So Kaczynski definitely has an eye for a certain type of action and a certain way to make things poignant. And I think this was, and I believe he even came from a background of directing commercials. Like,
Interesting.
yeah, like he wasn't even a movie director. So he
Right.
definitely knows how to hit the points. And
Yeah.
he obviously went somewhere with it because, Maverick was, such a big deal. So,
Right.
you're talking about a guy that knows what he's doing. And at least in this, you get to see, one of his earlier attempts at it. And you can obviously see the bones are there.
Yeah. He's incredibly successful in what he does. I mean, like you said, they're doing flips and they're so much more animated and it's more immersive, which I mean, obviously is a testament to the technology that's available now. But he brings that to life very well and in a way that I think everyone's able to access and appreciate it. Because where obvious, I feel like it's obvious that the original Tron was geared more towards children, while it had some adult themes. I feel like it was mostly geared towards kids. Where in 2010, you have to attack both a young audience because it's tons of fun and the nostalgia aspect for audiences that watched it in the 80s. And I think with the actiony part, he does a really good job for the kids, but the depth in the writing, I think, appeals to a more mature audience. So he gets the best of both worlds, in my opinion.
No, that is definitely true. You can see the the discomfort that Kevin Flynn has with how everything's turned out.
Yeah.
And that, because in the first movie, it's almost like this is great and this is fun. And look at this world we've invented. And,
Mm,
now we're going to, become heroes. And then in the second one, he's like, there's no heroes here. Everything got messed up. And, I let this guy get in control of stuff. And now he's just destroying everything and making
yeah.
everybody worse off than they were. And, it definitely, that's the part I have a difficult time because I feel like they're biting off the Matrix in a little bit.
Sure.
Is that it's now you had this great computer world and now it's a complete dystopia.
Yeah.
And so that really speaks a lot to it. But it also, just like you said, it tends to make it a little more interesting because it's not just a one-dimensional kind of thing. Like there's more aspects to it and there's more stuff to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And it's very, I mean, one of the greatest lines I love in the movie is actually a ripoff of another 80s movie that
Okay.
when anytime Sam is asking Kevin, what should we do now? We have to go and do something. He's like, do nothing. There's a lot to be said about doing nothing. And he goes,
Hmm.
and Clue is looking to put a different playing piece on the board, and it's exactly what he wants. He goes, and the only way that we could win this game is not to play.
Yeah.
All right. So there was a movie called War Games in the
Yeah. Okay.
80s with an extremely young Matthew Broderick.
Yeah.
And similar in a way, he's a hacker and he hacks into an extremely high security military AI.
Okay.
All right. And basically, this military AI's entire purpose was to run simulations so that the American military could figure out how to better defend itself against its enemies.
Okay.
And one of the programs it ran, there were a lot of different type of different theaters it would fight in and different tactical issues it would use. But one of the games simulations it would use
Mm,
was global thermonuclear war.
interesting.
So Matthew Broderick's character, while hacking into this computer, didn't know that it was a government AI. He thought it was just like this games company that had all these really cool games.
Yeah.
So he starts a game of global thermonuclear war,
Oh God.
and then the computer starts simulating it on NORAD's system, like North American
Yeah.
something air defense.
Yeah.
So the entire military thinks there's actually a like a global thermonuclear war starting.
Okay.
And so it gets a whole thing where they're going to start launching their missiles, and should they not launch the missiles? And the final deal is he's talking to the computer. He gets the computer to stop doing what it's doing. And the computer says, "This is a very interesting game. The only winning move is not to play."
Okay.
So when I heard that in Legacy, I was like, you guys bit that right out of War Games, because it was right around the same time that it was made.
Yeah.
So I was just like, and that seemed like, kind of like a throwback. I don't know if they meant it that way. I don't know
I'm
if they were
sure
just
they
trying,
did.
or maybe this, that was, Flynn being his Zen self. But
Mm.
like, as soon as I heard it, I was just like, there
Yeah.
you are, you know?
I, I
So,
mean,
but
Disney,
yeah.
yeah, Disney does its homework, so I would imagine that if it's in there, it's intentional.
Yeah.
I don't imagine that Disney does many things by accident because they're a freaking monopoly, so they have everybody, everybody under their thumb. Whatever they want to figure out, they figure it out. So I imagine that somebody along the line was like, "This would be a great line. We're going to take this from War Games." But
Yep.
yeah, I don't think it was an accident. But I'm sorry, I cut you off. What were you saying?
No, no, that's fine. No, and actually, just one thing I wanted to just infuse real quick was that so when they were doing the Academy Awards in the '80s for the original, around the time the original Tron was on,
Mhm.
the Academy refused to submit the movie for a special effects award because they said that using computers is cheating.
Wow.
So one of the best effects movie of the year, and they wouldn't even do it. And a movie that created so many other techniques
Yep.
that are used, and they wouldn't even allow it to be recognized.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
crazy.
we are where we are today in part because of what Tron was able to do. So for them to, stick their noses up to Tron in the '80s, I wonder if any of them look back now and go, well, we really screwed the pooch on that one.
I would bet that most of the people on the Academy Council from that time are probably not
Yeah,
alive anymore.
yeah. That was gonna be my first question, but I figured I'd ignore that. But yeah, you're probably right. Um, but so again, Ken, you got me to watch two movies that I've been meaning to watch for a long time. Another one being an '80s movie again, and these were my favorites so far. So I'm impressed. Thank you. Um, keep throwing things at me because I'll watch them. I'll feel compelled to, and then I won't feel bad that I won't feel bad anymore that I haven't watched all these '80s movies because I've been slacking. I haven't seen most of the movies. I actually have seen War Games, believe it or not. It's been years and years.
Okay.
I saw it in high school, so it's been 18, 17, 18 years, something like that. So I did see it. I remembered nothing of what you told me. So but I do remember seeing that in a film class or like a video tech class when I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. So, but yeah, keep throwing them my way. I'll keep watching them. Every once in a while, I'll throw something at you, but I'm assuming you've probably seen it already. And we will do this again for sure.
I am very, very thankful for, you know, your comments on that. I'm, I try to keep it. I know a lot of '80s movies can be hit or miss.
Hmm.
And the only ones I'm suggesting to you are the ones that are so near and dear to me, because I got a lot of ones that are just pieces of garbage. That
Yeah.
if I just want to show you, if you just want to see a crap movie that's kind of funny, but you could see it's obviously a ripoff of this, watch this. The
Okay.
only stuff I'm trying to keep to the core of the movies that were really, they had something to offer. There was
Hmm.
something new. There was something that they did that no other movie up to that point did,
Yeah.
which is, why I suggest these to you. And I think that that time in the 80s had, it was a very pivotal time just because of all these technologies that they just
Yeah.
started developing and working with that were never done before. I mean, I could go back to, like movies in the 50s or the 60s and do stop motion animation that Ray Harryhausen was doing,
Mm.
for, and how they carried that through even until the 80s.
Yeah.
And then this whole, just this genesis of, using computers and different type of technical abilities was just, this was the genesis of it. And it just, you can see when you look, especially when you look at the original Tron, what they did with what they had at that time is incredible. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with Star Wars.
Yeah.
The stuff that they did at that time was just, these people were geniuses, like how they came up with this stuff.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that I'd like to bring up, just because it's stuff that, as when people are younger, they might not be aware of this kind of thing, and
Mm.
might not be aware of how these things were created. And it's
Yeah.
just, it's such a great, I guess, a great stepping stone,
Sure.
a great, just like a starting block to get off on, and then say, hey, look, this is where this began. Now look what this next one was, and then look what
Mm.
they did with this other technology, because that's where it all began.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why it was always, I mean, even now when I go back and look at it, I still, you can see how the color didn't fill out well on their helmets all the time. And,
Yeah.
but just some of the action sequences in that were just, even just like you said, they hold up by today's standards even.
Yeah.
So it's just the idea that they could make something 30 years old and make it consistent and make it relevant is just, speaks volumes to their talent.
Yeah. I like I said in the beginning, I compare movies, sci-fi movies of this time to Star Wars, which I for years and years I felt like it was unfair, but I couldn't get it out of my head because that was like kind of my rock in cinema. And so I always went back to it. And this might be the first movie of that time period where I was like, well, maybe that's not unfair because other films did it too. I mean, watching the Superman films, it's like this is like great. It is what it is, but I Star Wars did it better 5 years ago. Um, this Tron lives up to the standard that like Star Wars set just a few years prior, and that's an incredible task because it's they're still regarded as some of the greatest movies ever. Um, so kudos to the team at Disney for being able to create these, like you said, and for to still be able to hold up now. That's a really tall task to be able to hold up. I mean, what are we, 41 years later now, and still doing its thing. So,
Yeah,
but Ken, so
definitely,
Ken,
definitely impressive. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I'm very humbled at the idea that you enjoyed it this much. Like
yeah,
I expected, I figured that you would probably like it, but just the idea that you're going to say that, out of all the stuff I suggested, this is your favorite,
yeah.
that, you know, that strikes me in my core, and I really appreciate it.
Well, you have good taste in films, so. But so, like I said last time, you were the first person that I've had on for a second time. I still have not had anyone else on for a second time. So you're the first. You're still the first repeat. This is not your third time. I've had a blast every single time. So we're definitely gonna do it again. And what was it the Last Starfighter? Is that the one that you suggested for
I
next
think,
time?
yeah, I think The Last Starfighter is another one that we should watch. It is going, so it follows along with the theme of early movies that used heavy CGI in them. in
Okay.
the very beginning.
Okay.
It is, it's probably going to be more cliche than Tron is.
Okay.
All right. It's your basic nobody, nothing kid in the middle of nowhere becomes hero of the galaxy.
Okay.
You know, still well acted, well done.
Mm,
There's some really classical, I believe they're classical stage actors in the
interesting.
movie, especially a couple of the main characters. And so you could tell one of the guys was, I forget his name now, but he was the lead role in The Music Man.
Okay.
Okay. So it's interesting to see. This is another one of those things where you have these movies in the 80s where you have guys who were like these big time actors in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and now
Mm,
they're transitioning to a later point in their career. And now they're showing up in these, hey, let's do a flashy science fiction movie and I'll be the
yeah.
lead character. It's a, you see that in a bunch of things. That's was as was in Tron 2. The guy that played Sark was one of those
Yeah.
really, older, classically trained English actors that now is, I'm going to be the bad guy.
Right.
So it's it's an interesting movie. It's definitely to a certain degree a Star Wars ripoff,
Okay.
but again, just the idea of I'm going down that route of these were the first movies to really heavily use CGI to
Okay.
an effective manner. And it is dated, but it definitely has its moments. If you
Yeah.
could put yourself, back into that 14-year-old child's mind.
Okay. So, are you familiar with Ender's Game?
Yes, I did watch Ender's Game.
So, just the little bit that I read up on The Last Starfighter seems like Ender's Game is very much a ripoff of uh The Last Starfighter.
It was, I had a difficult time figuring out what Ender's Game was supposed to be.
Hmm. Well, I
So
remember reading the book.
obviously, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember reading the book in middle school and loving it. And then when the movie came out, it didn't live up to the standards that I had set in my head, but um go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, they never do, but
Yeah.
the whole point of seeing Harrison Ford in a movie for a first time in a long time and in a space oriented movie, I
Hmm.
just, I didn't really get, I probably need to watch it again. I didn't get the idea of what the children were supposed to be doing. Like, first they're doing zero G exercises, and then he's doing all these computer controlled,
Hmm.
controlling the entire fleet, you know, just, remotely. And
Right.
it just seemed to me like there wasn't, when you have a character that's actually in the spaceship or that's actually, doing the battle,
Mm.
it brings a lot more to it. When he's sitting there
Oh, for
on a
sure.
computer screen and he's just, manipulating the fleet, there doesn't seem to be a lot of, skin in the game there. It's just like,
Yeah.
ship gets blown up. All right, well, I'll just put another one in. I like
Yeah.
more of that idea that, you're on the ship and now you're in danger. Your friends are in danger. You have to protect everybody. It's, your life is on the line. It just seemed like with that, and look, that might be a more realistic future for space combat, that everything's going to be remotely controlled and all that. I wouldn't see why it wouldn't be,
Right.
but it just seemed to miss something with me. And I guess,
Yeah.
like I said, I probably should check it again, but it just seemed to, at a certain point, it just seemed to fall flat for me.
Okay.
And I think Last Starfighter has that idea where, you know, I'm the guy in the cockpit. I got my co-pilot. The two of
Hmm.
us are going to fight against an entire armada, and we're going to save the planet.
Okay.
So that's where I think they might differ.
Okay. Yeah, I was having some trouble finding it. So once I can get a hold of it, I will check that one out and that'll be next on the list to talk about.
I got to see. I'm not sure if it's a. I got to see. I have my DVD here.
Okay.
I got to see if that was a Disney one or not, because if it is
Okay.
a Disney one, you might be able to find it.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, but I'll whatever. I'll send you some photos of the box. You'll be able to find out who produced it and all that.
Cool, cool. Well, Ken, third time's a charm. Uh, third time on the show. Again, I think it was my favorite conversation and my favorite movie that you had me watch. Looking forward to the next time. And you just have a fantastic night, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, man. I'm really thankful for you having me back on. I'm
Mm.
really very, very happy that you like this movie so much, or these movies so much. They meant so much to me growing up, and just the idea that you would connect with it that way is means a lot to me, and I appreciate it.
I'm glad. You're very welcome. And thank you again. Have a good night, man.
All right, take care.
See ya.